G'day, legends. I hope that you are having a fantastic day and a great midweek. Now, always a little bit of advice from me. Get some sun, get some exercise. You will feel better, because if you follow me, you probably follow these wars very closely, and it can be very wearing on you, as we do really talk about some very serious stuff, and some stuff of which around the world is absolutely horrific. But we talked about Ukraine yesterday, and today we're going to wade back into Israel, Gaza, and talk about something that is the most divisive thing that I have ever covered in my entire life. Now, with this divisiveness, I think there's been a lot of restrictions put on actually talking about this war, because every video I've done basically of this war, bar one or two, have been demonetized, restricted, and by YouTube. And that's no matter how I talk, what I show, it just gets restricted instantly. And I actually see this as a form of censorship that sadly turns a lot of other online creators away from actually talking about what is happening. And I think this is actually dangerous, what's happening on the ground and the people there, because if you can't see, if people won't create it, it won't be seen as much. Thank God we've got things like Twitter, but people won't follow it maybe as closely. And YouTube, they threaten the removal of accounts, they strike accounts, they demonetize people's work, especially when they haven't breached any of their community standards. If you'd seen what I got done for was like something like inciting terrorism, and it's just so silly. And of course, this puts people's livelihood at risk. So of course, people will rightfully not then talk about it, because if they lose that, then they might be in a bit of trouble. And I just want to really put down, the way I think about it is, never in history are those who suppress free speech the good guys. Now, with this, I'm not going to stop no matter what restrictions put on me, unless I just disappear one day. But if you would like to support me, the best ways are directly below. Not just me, but anyone on this platform who talks about this is getting hit again and again with these sort of things, and will be maybe removed down the line. Now, of course, today we're going to look at the maps. We're going to talk about the UN hostages, some friendly fire incidents, and go from there. So the main topic of the last 24 hours has been that the United Nations have demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war. Now, 153 of 193 countries voted in favor of this, and countries including the US and Israel voted against. In the General Assembly, of course, the US does not hold veto power like they do in the Security Council. So let's have a look at this voting and see how this went. Now, of course, green is in favor, red against, and yellow is abstention. So abstaining from voting. So, of course, we have the United States has voted against. The United Kingdom has abstained from voting. So have a lot of other countries here as well. But we see, of course, in the green. Now, of course, Israel voted against. Interestingly, Australia and Canada, typically right in line with the US, they have voted in favour as well. So it does show the majority of UN countries, of course, support this immediate ceasefire. Now, political journalist Caitlin Hu has said, while a General Assembly vote is politically significant and seen as a wielding moral weight, it is non-binding, unlike a Security Council resolution. Of course, look at the countries in the Security Council. If you've got veto power in that, the Security Council, they're not going to get anywhere in this. And a lot of people have brought up about, if you can have one country veto just everything, that is definitely a problem. Now, as I brought up in this, Australia, which is typically very in line with the US, we voted for. So let's look at what Senator Penny Wong has said. Of course, Australia's representative there. Australia voted with 152 countries on a UN resolution on the protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations. It calls for immediate humanitarian ceasefire so urgent humanitarian aid can flow and hostages be released. Now, I don't know if this, just through the UN, will have much effect on the hostages being released. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Australia has voted in support of the UN General Assembly resolution on protection of civilians. We're gravely concerned about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, as we know the humanitarian situation there is absolutely catastrophic and is getting worse and worse. Calls for immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This is the world urging pauses in hostilities be resumed. Of course, we saw that break as hostages were coming out, that Israel saw to a break. Once the hostages stopped, war started again, so urgent humanitarian aid can flow. We see such pauses as critical steps towards a sustainable and permanent ceasefire, but such a ceasefire cannot be one-sided. But, of course, the ceasefire needs both sides, and Israel will say, as long as Hamas are there and these other terrorist organizations that work alongside, sustainable and permanent won't work in a ceasefire, that it will come back to bite you on the ass. The resolution demanded the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. We'll see if that gets held up. Calls for all parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including protection of civilians. So that was from the Australians there. Now, addressing the assembly, the US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, said that Washington does agree that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire and civilians must be protected with international humanitarian law. A ceasefire right now would be temporary at best and dangerous at worst, referring to there what people have said. If you have a ceasefire now, Hamas is going to just go refit, rearm, and launch another attack. She continues, dangerous to Israelis who would be subject to relentless attacks, and also dangerous to Palestinians who deserve a chance to build a better future for themselves, free from a group that hides behind innocent civilians. And like we've spoken about with the Free Palestine campaign, people will say, well, free Palestine of Hamas. The US also noted that this resolution does not condemn Hamas. And this is one of the amendments that the US wants. And in my belief, to not condemn Hamas in this is just crazy for what has actually happened. And the UN's already poor reputation for many has, well, whatever was left is slowly trickling out for some people, although some people are saying this is showing that the UN is working. If it's working, well, we'll see a ceasefire down the track. And with the US and Israel against this resolution, this likely will just not change anything, as Israel has stood firm since day one to operationally collapse Hamas until the point that it poses no threat no longer to Israel or Israeli citizens. And people have called out the hypocrisy of those who have voted yes while committing their own humanitarian violations. People mainly point towards Russia and China, that who is Russia and China, to point over there and say, oh, that's wrong, when we see what is happening both inside and externally to this. Now, also theorizing the hypocrisy that if any of these other nations had 1,200 people slain and 240 taken hostage, that they wouldn't accept this ceasefire either, and that the response from them could be far greater. And I see a lot of discussion around that. If people came into just X country and had the same effect, what would it then be in the fallout from there? But I do believe the humanitarian crisis needs to be helped there. There are hundreds of thousands, millions displaced in there, and we've had tens of thousands killed as well. But in this, we'll see if Hamas holds up its end of the bargain and releases all of the hostages. Now, a Reuters report has said a Hamas official in exile, Izzat el-Resheg, in a statement on Telegram, echoed that reaction, saying Israel should stop its aggression, genocide, and ethnic cleansing against our people. And so far, this has had really no effect on the ongoing operations inside Gaza, as the fighting and bombing still continues. Now, let's look at when this went through, what Israel's ambassador Gilad Erdan has said.
I honestly don't know how can someone look in the mirror and support a resolution that doesn't condemn Hamas and doesn't even mention Hamas by name. But you know what? I have an idea. If you want a real ceasefire, here is the right address. This is the phone number of Hamas's office in Gaza. You can all call +970 599 3765 and ask for Yihya Sinwar. Tell Hamas to put down their arms, turn themselves in, and return our hostages. This will bring a complete ceasefire that will last forever. No piece of paper, especially one that is adopted by a biased, politicized majority, will prevent Israel from defending itself against those that seek our destruction. Israel is fighting a war for her future. There is not a single member state here, not a single member state here that would act differently in a similar situation.
So, brings up in the end of that the member states would act similarly in the given situation of this, but also talking about that it didn't call out Hamas. It didn't not only condemn it, didn't even say by name in this either. And as well, again, stating about the hostages that Israel has said the way to, having an end to ceasefire is lay down the arms, give back the hostages, and of course a bit of tongue-in-cheek with the phone number as well. So let's actually have a look over this. The text of the adopted resolution is from the UN's website. It gives just a little bit of a rundown of what it's looking for. So demands an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, reiterates its demand that all parties comply with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, notably with regard to the protection of civilians, demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well ensuring humanitarian access, decides to adjourn the 10th emergency special session temporarily and to authorize the President of the General Assembly at its most recent session to resume its meeting upon request from the member states. And then this does continue onto the second page, that it's not, and this is from the UN website, like we spoke about, not binding but influential. Resolutions by the General Assembly, though not legally binding on nations, do carry immense moral weight, representing the collective resolve of the UN membership on a matter of grave importance. These resolutions also lead to key legal framework and standards, such as the over 60 human rights instruments underpinning the international rights regime, which emanate from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But like we've seen, Hamas still holds the hostages, Hamas still fire rockets out, Israel is still fighting and moving within Gaza as well. So yes, this vote was maybe a big thing politically. What effect then we've seen on the ground? Fairly limited at this point. And I see a hell of a lot of focus on Israel stopping the fighting, but actually very little on Hamas or stop fighting or to hand back the hostages. And this has always been what Israel has said is a non-negotiable in any further talks, ceasefires, pauses in fires, are those hostages back. Let's look over some news on two more of the hostages here today from the IDF's official Twitter. The bodies of Eden Zakira and CSM Ziv Dado, who were taken hostage by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, have been recovered by our special forces. 27-year-old Eden was taken hostage from the Ram Music Festival. 36-year-old CSM Ziv served as a logistics supervisor in the Golani Brigade's 51st Battalion, Company Sergeant Major, fairly high non-commissioned rank. Locating the missing and bringing the hostages home is a national mission. We are working with all security agencies, intelligence and operational means to fulfill it. That two gentlemen here fell in battle during the operations that enabled the location of Eden and Ziv's bodies. Additional soldiers were injured. We send our heartfelt condolences to the Eisenkot and Berkowitz families and will continue to support them. So Israel is still going in hard, trying to pull out the hostages that are still held in Gaza. We don't know how many hostages are still alive. If Hamas and the IRGC's goal of the 7th of October massacre was to unite support against Israel, it definitely worked. It does seem that people have all but forgotten what actually happened on October the 7th. And the vast majority of people, I say at least online, see that Israel's response was not proportional. And I'll say that military response is never proportional. And no one ever actually defines what they expect in proportionality. Like, what did you expect? Like, if you say it's blown out, it's not proportional, okay, what did you expect Israel to do? That's a question I'd really like to ask people. Maybe I'm biased because I've got a military background and I see things maybe a little bit differently, but that's, I think, a very interesting question, is what actually is proportionality to the horror that we saw on those days? Is it this? Is it not this? Is it something else? Is it not bombing, maybe just special forces work? That would be, people have this idea that you could just send in special forces and target Hamas without the bombing. That's just not how military operations like this work. And with this, we've seen a hell of a lot of civilian casualties, and any civilian casualty, one is too many. And following October the 7th, we've seen Hamas hiding beneath their vast network of tunnels underneath Gaza, in civilian infrastructure, under civilian infrastructure, and Hamas has used its own and Israeli hostages as a tool for propaganda. And they knew exactly how Israel would respond to this. And Israel had to respond some way. Now, I'm not saying they responded in the correct way. I don't know. Thank God I'm not a general, because I don't know how I would respond. But you cannot say that Hamas has not used their civilian population and the hostages as a tool for propaganda. And like it or not, each death inside Gaza actually works in Hamas's favour here. Like we've talked about, a ceasefire would benefit Hamas. Now, not only has this attack rallied hundreds of millions of people against Israel, it's actually had many, many people all around the world call for a genocide of Jews and Israelis. We've seen this from even Sydney, Australia, in front of the Opera House, which is disgusting. Now, at a donor event in Washington, Biden said, and I'm actually going to, for once here, say that Biden actually hit the nail on the head with this, but this actually was before that UN vote resolution 2. But he said, Israel now has support from most of the world, including the US and European Union. But they are starting to lose that support by indiscriminate bombing that takes place. And Israel are pushing very quickly and deeply into Gaza. And I think they're likely pushing even harder because they know that their support, both militarily and as well politically from the US, could be limited. Look at these voting here. Really, the big supporting country there is the US voting with them. And the question is, will Israel achieve their goals? And of course, their goal is the eradication of Hamas. And history tells us that it's very unlikely that that will happen. Ideologies are almost impossible to destroy. And ideologies may change their name, but it ends up rearing its head one place or another. I know this all too well of being an Afghanistan veteran myself. And the ongoing campaign inside Gaza could just be radicalizing more people by a factor of 10 around the world than militants it's actually destroying. And this, of course, is the impossible juggle with these groups of how do you deal with it? If you're going to radicalize 10 times the people, but at the same time, you can't just have that on your board. It's incredibly difficult juggle of this at that high end, and that's why well above my pay group. And also in this, conventional militaries almost always fail against small guerrilla forces, and there's examples of this all throughout history. We can have a look as well now at reported friendly fire incidents that are happening inside Gaza. I had to do a bit of research about this to see what is actually a normal sort of percentage of a blue on blue or a friendly fire incident. Of the 105 soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip during the ground offensive, 20 were killed by so-called friendly fire and other incidents, according to new data released by the IDF. 13 of the soldiers were killed by friendly fire due to mistaken ID, including in airstrikes, tank fire, and gunfire. So you're talking somewhere in the 20% mark here. One soldier was killed by gunfire that was unintended to hit them, no shit, and another 2 were killed by accidental misfires. This is a big problem. Accidental misfires. No one who is in the military should have an accidental, negligent discharge like this. 2 soldiers were killed in incidents involving armed vehicles running over troops. That is incredibly easy. I don't put that really as a friendly fire incident. Armored vehicles, there is zero visibility out of armored vehicles, tracked vehicles. There's a very famous Australian clip of the reversing. Look up like Australian soldiers. I'll put a clip of it here. And 2 soldiers were killed by shrapnel from explosives intentionally set off by Israeli forces. So about 20%. And I thought, wow, that is very, very high. So we're going to go over this little clip from this. So this is actually this is Wikipedia, and we have time as well. There are many, many thousands of friendly fire incidents in recorded military history, accounting for an estimated 2 to 20% of all casualties in battle. The examples listed below illustrate their range and diversity, but this does not reflect increasing frequency. The rate of friendly fire, once allowance has been made the numbers of troops committed to battle, has remained remarkably stable and unimproved for the last 200 years. Now, it does seem that friendly fire incidents are a lot lower on that percentage when you're talking about like a near-peer conflict, and that they do increase when you're fighting more of a guerrilla or terrorist style form, especially in built-up areas. And of course, Gaza is one of the most dense areas in the world. As war has, and this is from time, as war has become increasingly antiseptic, the ability to track who killed whom, friendly fire has loomed as a growing problem. In 1991's Gulf War, 24 of the 148 US battle deaths, 35 were due to friendly fire, so 24%. So not out of the ordinary of those. But of course, blue on blue friendly fire incident is a shocking thing, and the negligent discharge of a weapon is something that no one who's handling a weapon should have if they've had the correct training. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look over the maps. We're going to war mapper, Surak maps, as we do know that Israel has made some large gains through Gaza in the past few days. And I spoke about this, of maybe they're pushing very, very hard because I think their time of international support is getting limited. So let's step back to, actually, let's have a look at War Mapper first before we step on to the three-dimensional map and just have a look at how things are looking different. So, of course, this is a map of the 6th of December here, and then let's get one of the 11th. And you can just see, so this is north to north. You can see how much more that Israel has actually controlled. Now, these aren't the greatest maps, but we'll have better ones in a sec. But you can see, and then have a look then in the south. I'll bring up one here. Of course, south in Khan Yunis. So this is the 6th, this is the 11th. So in 5 days, have expanded a lot of controlled territory throughout the south and the north of the country. Now, let me get rid of these. Let's have a look. Surak, 11th of December. Northern front, the IDF made significant advancements into this district, which is on the verge of being taken with only some pockets of resistance. So we're talking right in this, and you can see just by these arrows how much was taken here. Now, Israeli troops extended their control over the Al-Wada Street and Beit Lahia, isolating from the latter Jabalia, where they advanced from Sheikh Zayed and Fallujah Street. Israel made new advances in the Rimmel district. Now, this is right around here. So this is around Al-Alwa Street right here. So we can see these major advancements here, and you can see the extension out from the Indonesian hospital here. So interesting, the amount actually being taken in here, as well as Israel made new advancements in the Rimmel district. This is the Rimmel district here. So of course in the north of Gaza. Let's just have a look. So we're talking in here, here and around. Now we were looking, if those interested, we're from Sderot, looking in when I was there. Now in the south, this we've seen a hell of a lot of advancement from the IDF. IDF isolated Bani Shelia from north and south and continue advancing in Katsiba, the neighborhood of Khan Yunis, towards Hamad housing project. In addition, troops reached the greenhouse complex. So we're talking around in here, this Bani Shelia, and are cutting off areas in here. So the enveloping bits and pieces here. Israeli troops opened a new axis south of Deir al-Balah. Meanwhile, other axis advanced towards the city along the Saladin Road, reaching the Kafom Darom area at this grid. So opening new axis, pushing out to, of course, the north, but then pushing up to the northeast along this road. Now, this grid reference here gives us an idea of how far out the Israeli forces have actually pushed. Now, this, of course, is this grid, and we come down and I'll actually recognize this building. So it is these buildings right here. Let's see if we can get some Google Earth going. So this building is right here, and as you can see, pushing then down this road here. And from here, if we zoom out, we can actually see where then the north part that Israel is assaulting, and then the south. Now, could there be some degree of trying to have these two meet and cut not only a north and south, but then an east and west? And this is about 9 kilometers up that road, but Israel has been moving fairly quickly up here down this road and are isolating more and more areas. As you can see in here, this is only across really one street. We're talking 200 meters, so well within then small arms fire, and we'll close up an envelope. This maybe already has happened. So a hell of a lot of fighting, and Israel is making a lot of ground inside Gaza, especially over the last 24 or 48 hours. Now, we just have one more update that we can look at here. The most recent one, of course, being the 12th. We're looking the 11th. On the northern front, IDF advanced north of Jabalia and south of Beit Lahia city, reaching Kamal Adwan Hospital. Meanwhile, Israeli troops withdrew from the Jabalia Girls Junior High School, leaving the complex destroyed. As we know, up in the north, most has been destroyed, but there's been some gains in around Jabalia here. So let's actually go up into the north and have a look. Of course, here's the north, and where we're looking is just down in here. So let's have a look. This is geolocated to here, where they've pulled out, saying that they did leave it destroyed. As we do know, there's been a hell of a lot of fighting and bombing, and up in the north here, from people I know who are in or have been to the north, say that basically everything has been destroyed, or at least shows the scar of incredible battles happening. Now, I thought I'd just show you one last thing. So, of course, a lot of you followed me while I was in Israel about when I was in Sderot filming. So I thought I'd show you just right at the end whereabouts in Sderot I actually was and where I was filming from, just to give you an idea of the view. So we see then this roundabout here. Now, all these houses, these are very affluent houses. Of course, Hamas actually came into Sderot, and there's still signs of active gunfighting that happened, you know, holes in walls, stained blood on the ground, at least when I was there. So we were standing about here, and we were looking here. Let's go in. here, looking across into this northeastern corner of Gaza. So not very far away, staring in. And this area in here, I'm not sure about now, but there's still a lot of exits of tunnels were popping up in and around these regions, of course, now under Israeli control, but doesn't mean that a tunnel entry can't pop up somewhere as Israel head more and more into the center of Gaza, especially in the north, and are strangling both the north and south. Legends, that is all that I have for you today. Again, if you'd like to support me, links down below, but never feel obliged. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thanks.